What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the penultimate final thoughts video of the season, where I'm going to go through the latest press conference information, including the update on Bruno Fernandes. I've got lists of defenders and midfielders in order of who I think is best to bring in this week. I'm going to tackle a bunch of your questions, then talk about my own team, and that is it. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and let's get into it. All right, let's start with Man United. Lots of people have been waiting for an update on Bruno Fernandes. So Ten Hag said that Fernandes and McTominay are back in training. Rashford also back and could play versus Arsenal on Sunday. Mount has picked up another injury and won't play. Still hope that Martinez, Varane, Lindelof, Shaw could return for the FA Cup final. So first of all, on Fernandes, he's back in training. We don't really know if it's full team training, how long he's been training for, anything like that. But that's obviously a positive sign. And from what we've seen of him in the past, before the game against Crystal Palace, he always plays. So I'd be very surprised if he doesn't start that match versus Arsenal. Man United absolutely need him. So I think there's less justification to sell him, especially if it was for a hit. So if you're one of those people that's been, a little bit screwed over with defender injuries and dealing with Fernandes was going to cost a -4, I'd probably just keep hold of him at this point. If you want to sell him to downgrade to someone cheaper so that you can upgrade another position, then maybe it's still worth doing. But for most people, I would say just keep hold of him. If you're in a lucky position where you've got no other injuries to deal with and you just don't want to take the risk with Fernandes, then absolutely you could still use a free transfer to get rid of him. But for the most part, I would say this probably means he plays against Arsenal, he plays against Newcastle. Does he play 90 minutes in both games? Potentially not, because obviously there was a genuine issue there that kept him out of the squad in the last game. But I think he now looks like a pretty good option for the double. Just a couple of other names on the list to talk about. It's not really a massive thing in terms of FPL picks, but obviously Rashford being back would be handy in terms of Man United attack in general. That probably helps Fernandes as well, having Garnacho and Rashford rather than Garnacho and Antony. But the defenders are a major issue because from what I can see, no defenders are back from the last game where we saw Casemiro and Evans line up as the centre-back. So we could see that again with Wan-Bissaka and Dalot fullbacks. That's pretty good for Arsenal. So if you're sat there with an Arsenal attacker, thinking about whether to sell them to a double game weeker, I think there's scenarios where you can do that, especially if it's one of the better double game week options like Gordon, Palmer, Son, etc. But I really don't think there's much of an issue keeping hold of them for Man United away and then having them for Everton at home last day of the season. So I'm still worried about exactly how big the scoreline might be for Arsenal versus Man United, but I'm a little bit happier seeing that Fernandes and McTominay are back and Rashford could play as well, because I think overall that's a positive. I can't guarantee you that Fernandes is going to start, but it seems pretty likely that he will. So I think for most people, you're just holding on to him. All right, moving on to Newcastle next. And the first thing to say is there was no mention about Callum Wilson whatsoever from Eddie Howe. So wherever these rumours started from that he'd maybe picked up an injury, it doesn't look like that's true. And Wilson himself has also been posting pictures on Instagram of him in training. So I think we have to assume he's perfectly okay. I still stand by what I've already said this week and last week. I still think Isak is the better option because he's clearly the first choice number 9 if they're only going to play with one, and his minutes are probably better. But if you want to take a punt on Wilson, I'd assume he'll get at least one start in the double if he's fully fit, and there's a chance he's going to get 2 as well. We know what he can do when he gets the minutes. So presumably he's fine. There hasn't been any other mention from journalists and stuff about him having an injury. So just going to assume that no news is good news. Elsewhere, he said that Trippier has trained well this week. Decision made today for Brighton. So there is a chance he's going to be back in the squad against Brighton. I think that's pretty clear that he will be. It's just whether or not he gets a start. He's been out since March. The last game he played was, I think it was against Wolves in game week 27. Yeah, and that was at the start of March. So it's 2 months out. I still wouldn't be completely shocked to see him start against Brighton. But obviously, there's no way I can guarantee that. It's more likely that he'd be on the bench and then come on, for some minutes towards the end and then maybe start against Man United. I would say for Trippier, because I'm sure some people are going to be thinking about taking a punt, I think the most likely scenario is probably 1 start. And then I'm not sure whether it's more likely he gets 0 starts or 2. I think maybe 2 would just about edge it. But I think the realistic thing with Trippier is probably 1 start and then 1 appearance off the bench. Is he worth bringing in? He's quite expensive, so I guess it depends what it blocks for you in game week 38, and there is always a chance that he doesn't start either of the games. So it depends how much of a risk you want to take. The one thing I will say is there's not a huge amount of standout, fantastic defender options this week. Like players like Davern are absolutely fine, but in terms of a defender that's guaranteed 2 starts with great attacking potential and also a chance for clean sheets as well, there ain't many, right? Porro might get a clean sheet against Burnley. Man City looks tough. Potential for attack and returns. Vardiol as well, of course. But outside of that, with double game weeks, there ain't many. So I can see why people want to take a punt on Trippier. I don't think I would be that interested, but I do think there's a chance he gets 1 start. The knock-on effect is, of course, if he's playing, it's going to be right back. So where does Livramento go? He could just move to left back, and therefore he might get a start in both games in the double, but that's far from guaranteed. It could be Lewis Hall that starts one of those games as well. So I guess it depends how much money you've got to spend. Livramento is very cheap at 4 million, so you could still take that risk with him, but you can't bring him in thinking it's a guarantee he gets 2 starts, because that's just not necessarily the case. Fabian Schär is out for the Brighton game, but feeling better. Eddie Howe said, let's see for next week. So is there a chance that Schär could play against Man United in the second game of 37 or Brentford away in 38? It's possible. We discussed this last week that Eddie Howe didn't completely rule him out. He just said, I doubt we'll see him again this season. So Schär could be back. But honestly, if you've got him in FPL, he's still a sell, and I definitely wouldn't buy. And then lastly, returning players, Joelinton, Pope and Almiron, all okay for Burnley. Lots of questions about Dubravka. I'm not really sure what I would do. Well, if I had Dubravka, I'm pretty sure I would sell him because I just wouldn't want to take the risk, and I would not buy Pope because I think he's a risk as well. But there's part of me that thinks the correct call is to keep hold of him and hope that you get at least 1 start. The reality is there's a chance, however small that might be, that Dubravka doesn't play a single minute in the double game week. Like Eddie Howe said that, you know, he deserved to play last week and Nick Pope is building up his strength, but he also said that Nick Pope's trained very well this week. I think it's only a matter of time before he comes back into that first 11, and I wouldn't be shocked if it's one of the games in 37. So if I had Dubravka, I'd probably sell him. There is, of course, the other risk that he might play twice and you might take a -4 to get rid of him, but I'd rather have the security from someone else. So I can't tell you whether Pope or Dubravka is going to start. All I can say is I wouldn't buy either of them. And if I had Dubravka, I would probably be selling. So it's not just defenders and Bruno Fernandes that have had injury concerns since wildcard 35. Joao Pedro is now a doubt for Newcastle away in game week 37 as well. De Zerbi said, Joao Pedro has an ankle problem. It's sad news for us. Today it happened, and I don't know if he can play tomorrow. So he's not completely ruled out, but he is a doubt, which is less than ideal going into a double game week. And of course, if he doesn't play against Newcastle away, there isn't a guarantee that he's back for Chelsea at home. You'd hope he would be, based on what De Zerbi has said. But if it's only happened today, there's not really a guarantee that they know exactly what's wrong and how big of an issue this might be. So clearly, do not buy Joao Pedro if he was part of your plans this week. If you've got him, it's a tricky situation if you don't have much money because he's quite cheap. I'm just going to look him up here. He's like 5 point something million. Yeah, 5.2. And if you're looking for double game week forwards, you've only really got Haaland, Jackson, Isak or Wilson from Newcastle, and maybe Højlund. But I don't think many people want to buy Højlund for Man United right now. So I would probably go for either Jackson if you don't have triple Chelsea and don't own him already. If not, maybe a punt on Callum Wilson. If you can't get another Newcastle or Chelsea player, it might be worth a hit if you can downgrade someone else to free up a slot. But otherwise, you're probably looking at holding on to him and hoping for the best, or just going to a single game week forward instead. And I got to be honest, I haven't really given single game week forwards a huge amount of thought. Like Tony doesn't look great at the moment. Calvert-Lewin's got Sheffield United at home this week. I think he's fit at the moment. I'm just going to double check this. I'm doing this a little bit on the fly here. Yeah, he's not flagged or anything, but obviously it's Arsenal away last day of the season. So that is pretty terrible. Like Cunha, Wolves, maybe. Antonio against Luton at home. There's not a huge amount of options. Chris Wood, Chelsea at home and Burnley away last day of the season. Could be an option. I don't know what I would do. It's a really tricky one because I've only just seen this news. I think if it was me and I couldn't get to Jackson or Wilson or Isak, because I already own them, I've already tripled up, and I didn't want to take a hit to remove them, but I also don't want to take the risk with Joao Pedro, I think I would just buy Højlund. As bad as it looks right now, at least you're going to get the extra game and the pretty much guaranteed starts. I just don't know if there's a huge amount of single game week forwards that are better. Like, obviously, Arsenal, Man United away, Everton at home, great. But you don't want to buy someone like Gabriel Jesus. Like, Ollie Watkins, Liverpool at home is not terrible. I think I would take the risk with Højlund. I think there is a case because of his price. If you're low on team value, and this is Joao Pedro now, you could just keep him and hope that he's back for Chelsea. But it's not a guarantee. And if you're on bench boost, that's an even bigger problem, I would say. So if I wouldn't want to do this for many people. But if you have to, maybe even just buy Højlund. Also worth quickly mentioning as well, if Joao Pedro does miss Newcastle away and possibly Chelsea at home as well, that does mean that someone else would need to take penalties. So straight away, someone like Pascal Gross will become a better option for the double. I think he's okay anyway if you're looking for someone a little bit cheaper and a differential. He's 6.1 million. The two fixtures, obviously Newcastle away, Chelsea at home. But he does take penalties when Joao Pedro's not on the pitch. And his minutes are pretty much guaranteed. He's played 90 minutes every single game since game week 28. So he now becomes a better option. Does he go ahead of the likes of, Gordon, Richarlison, Fernandes? Not necessarily, but he is someone else you could look at. So for once, it's nice and simple with Man City. They've got a fully fit and available squad versus Fulham, which has been confirmed by Pep Guardiola. When he was asked about injuries, he said, no, everything is fine. So whichever players you wanted to buy from City, you're looking good to go, right? I'd say best four options are probably Haaland, Foden, De Bruyne, and Vardy. But if you're sat there with Ederson or Walker, there's no need to use transfers to get rid of them. I think if you had Walker, I wouldn't do a sideways move to get Vardy. I would just keep Walker and hope for the best and have that extra transfer for game week 38 instead. We've already talked about this week using 2 free transfers to swap Ederson to Vardy, so selling Ederson to free up a Man City slot. You could do it if you wanted to. I'm still leaning towards the fact that 2 free transfers in 38 might be more beneficial. But I really don't think it's a terrible use of transfers either. If you'd prefer to get Vardy, I'll absolutely go ahead and do that. No, I would definitely not do it for a hit. In terms of who's better, Foden and De Bruyne, I think they're pretty similar in terms of the points you should expect from them over the last 3 matches they have for game weeks 37 and 38. If I had to say who's slightly better for minutes, probably Foden. But De Bruyne is a massive differential in comparison. So if you've got the money for him, he's probably the one that I would go for. But if you're sat there with Foden, no issues whatsoever. He's a great price, great value. Just keep hold of him. So similar enough situation with Spurs. They don't have a fully fit squad, but they haven't got any new injuries from last week. So the likes of Romero, Van de Ven, Porro, Son, Maddison, Johnson, Richarlison, all fit. In terms of who's going to start, that's a more tricky question. My assumption is that Richarlison will definitely start against Burnley. And there's a doubt about Man City, but that's not the end of the world because that means he's probably got a good chance of starting Sheffield United as well. I don't think it's completely out of the question that Richarlison could start all 3 games. Again, it's not a guarantee, but I think it's possible. So I do like him as a differential still. With Maddison, I'm really not sure. Obviously, he hasn't played the last couple of games. I think he has got a chance of coming back in for that Burnley game because he's looked okay when he's come off the bench. Nothing spectacular, but he hasn't been terrible either. But there is still a doubt there. And if I was sat there right now with Maddison in my team, I'd probably be looking to sell him. Some of you are thinking about doing it for a hit. I'm still not completely convinced that's something that I would do. But I think if you wanted to go from Maddison to a different double game weeker for a -4 just to give you peace of mind, it's not the worst hit you're going to take in a FPL season. Just quickly, something else that Postecoglou said. He was asked about Oliver Skipp playing at left back because he came on in the last game against Liverpool and played there. He said, we have been working with Skippy in the last few weeks. When we lost Destiny and Ben, we were left with Emerson, who is not really a left back. We were looking around at options, and in training we have been using him in that space. Now, he went on and talked a little bit more, but essentially there is a chance, I guess, that Skipp could play left back. Therefore, probably don't buy Emerson Royale if any of you were looking at him. I mean, I know he's cheap at 4.3, but it's only 0.1 million more to get Van de Ven. So if you really want a Spurs defender, hopefully you can find that little bit of extra money and just get the nailed-on defender instead. Because Emerson Royale might start, and I know some of you have been looking at him, but it maybe wouldn't be surprising based on what Postecoglou said for Skipp to start there instead. So best Spurs players probably right now to be looking at, Son. I still think he's the best attacker. Some people are kind of debating that on Twitter the other day, but he's the only one that's nailed, and he's on penalties, right? I think Richarlison looks great for the price, but he has not gone ahead of Son, in my opinion, in the pecking order. Maddison I definitely wouldn't buy. I still wouldn't be completely sure about Johnson, even though his minutes have looked good recently. And obviously it's Porro, Romero, Van der Ven at the back, or Vicario if you need a goalkeeper. So Pochettino was asked about injuries at Chelsea, and he said, "We need to assess today some players that maybe can be involved in the game. I am happy that in the last week of the season we have nearly all of the players fit and available." Now, in terms of the mention about assessing players, I took that to mean, players that haven't played for a while, like Reece James and Kunku, etc. I don't think it means anyone that played last week, like Madueke, Palmer, Gallagher, etc. Pochettino also said that Reece James could be in the Chelsea squad tomorrow. Now, for sure, do not go and buy Reece James. He's been out for a very long time. There is no way, I would say there's no way he's even going to get a start in the double, let alone two. So I just wouldn't go there. But in terms of Malo Gusto, he wasn't mentioned, at least from what I could see. And obviously he did get that cameo in the last game. So I still think the most likely outcome is that he gets at least one start. Therefore, unless you're trying to free up a Chelsea spot for Nicholas Jackson, I'd probably keep hold of him unless you've got the spare transfer to deal with it. If it's going to cost a -4, I'd probably keep hold of Gusto. And the best Chelsea defender to buy right now is probably Cucurella. He's playing really well at the moment, fairly attacking as well. And obviously Chelsea are off the back of two clean sheets in a row. I mean, Forest away and Brighton away is not going to be easy, but Bournemouth at home is not a bad game. And obviously they do have the extra fixture this week. So Cucurella is probably where I would look. Otherwise, it's Palmer, Jackson as your best two attackers, and Madueke if you want to go a little bit different. Again, if you've got a goalkeeper spot, Petrovic looks fine. Chelsea tweeted that they always tweet like their injury list and kind of whether they're in training or rehabilitation, whatever it might be. And Sanchez is still in partial training, but also they're pushing for a top 6 spot as well. So Petrovic is just fine at this point. And with Reece James, if you've watched the channel for a while, you'll know I'm always looking to bring him into my team, despite the fact it always ends in misery. There is no way I'm buying him this week, and probably no way I'm buying him at all this season, because I don't see me getting to game week 38 and selling Palmer, Petrovic, or Jackson. But if there's nothing else to do, and I could free up a slot for Chelsea, and we got news that he was going to start against Bournemouth in game week 38, that's got to be one of the most fun defender differentials for the final day of the season. But a lot's got to happen to make that a thing. And the fact that Chelsea have a double this week means most people are going to triple up and just ignore him completely. But just bear that in mind for game week 38. For 37, you can just ignore him entirely. So it wouldn't be an FPL game week without Mikel Arteta throwing a bit of a spanner in the works. So he said in his press conference that there's a few doubts over some players. And then the tweet that I took from Simon Collins said he hints that it's Saka and Tomiyasu. And I've seen other tweets going around saying that it is those two players that Arteta is basically saying are doubts going into game week 37. Now with Tomiyasu, I can't imagine that he's that highly owned, and presumably not many people are looking to bring him in this week. He is quite cheap at 4.5 million as has started the last 3 matches. But honestly, I just don't think he's worth taking a risk with if he is a genuine doubt. With Saka, look, I always think you've got to take a manager at their word. But also, I just don't believe it whatsoever. I just think there is no chance, unless his leg is completely falling off, that Saka is missing Man United away when there is a title on the line. It's just not happening. So I wouldn't let this worry me at all. I guess if you're someone that always wants to play super safe and you want to buy an Arsenal midfielder this week, you could just go for Havertz or even Odegaard instead of Saka. But I will be shocked if he is not in the lineup on, I think it's Sunday, right? It's got to be a Sunday game. Yeah, Sunday at 4:30. I'd be shocked if Saka doesn't play. So I wouldn't panic about it. If you own Saka, I think you're in exactly the same situation as before this press conference. That, for the most part, you probably don't need to sell him. If it's for one of those, I don't know, what I would call main attackers like Son, Gordon, Palmer, Haaland, etc., and you need to sell Saka to get one of those, then you could do it. But for most people, you're just keeping hold of him. Good fixture this week. Great fixture, to be honest, with the injuries. I mean, you never know, right? Having to go away to Old Trafford. Crazier things in football have happened. But I think everybody, even Man United fans, just know Arsenal are winning that game. And then Everton at home last day of the season is good as well. So Saka apparently a doubt. I don't know if I believe that. So I'm going to get onto some more specific questions in a minute. But I've already had a lot of questions this week along the lines of, I'm selling this defender. Who's the best option to bring in? And as always, the answer is going to depend on your budget and which teams you're already tripled up on and stuff like that. So I've put together this list of possible defender transfers in this week in a rough order of who I think is best for the double game week in particular. Although for some players, it is worth bearing in mind which fixture they have in 38 as well, if you're going to need to play them that week too. So I've gone for the best defender as Porro. Burnley at home, Man City at home. Good chance of a clean sheet in the first game, I would say. Very attacking. You could put Vardio as the best defender to bring in this week if you wanted to. It's pretty close between the two. But I've gone Porro, then Vardio, and then Walker, and then Romero. Just because I think the Man City defence is obviously better than the Spurs. And Romero does have a bit of goal threat, but it's not like Porro or Vardio. So I think Walker is probably just about ahead. But those two are quite close. Then Dan Burn is the only nailed Newcastle defender for both games. And with Joao Pedro out, I think that Brighton at home fixture now looks even better for Newcastle. It's still a fixture I would expect Brighton to score, but I certainly don't hate it. Then I've gone for Cucurella, Forest away, Brighton away, as the best Chelsea defender, who's also at least a little bit attacking, more so than maybe Van de Ven. But after Cucurella, I've gone for Dunk. Newcastle away, Chelsea at home, then Van de Ven, Burnley at home, Man City at home. These are all quite close decisions. Like if you had a Chelsea and Spurs slot open, I think it's close between Cucurella and Van de Ven, but I would probably take Cucurella, who I think is a bit more attacking. Then I've gone for Dalot, Arsenal at home and Newcastle at home, mostly because I couldn't bring myself to put a double game weeker below the single game weekers. But honestly, if you're bringing in a player that you need to play this week and next week, there is absolutely an argument to go for an Arsenal defender over Diogo Dalot, especially because no defenders, from what I could see earlier, are back for Man United this week. I just could not bring myself to put him below the single game weekers. Then I've gone for Trent as a differential against Villa away. Obviously, quite a lot of money. I mean, you could argue that Tarkowski and Branthwaite against Sheffield United at home are better than Trent this week, but I think when you couple it with 38 Wolves at home for Liverpool, I'd rather go for Trent, and also he's super attacking. I think whichever Everton defender you want out of Tarkowski and Branthwaite, either works. Branthwaite's obviously got quite a few, or at least a few attacking returns recently, but Tarkowski is not a slouch in the air. We've seen him score a few bullet headers before, and he's probably the more differential of the two as well. And I'm not sure, let me just double check their price. So Branthwaite is 4.4, I think. No, he's 4.5 now. Tarkowski's actually more expensive at 4.6, so it might come down to how much money you've got. And then you've got Ben White, Gabriel, and Saliba. I've put them in that order because Ben White is probably more of a differential at the moment than Gabriel. And Gabriel and Ben White are probably more attacking than Saliba. It doesn't mean Saliba's a bad option. If there isn't a huge amount of goals in an Arsenal game and they keep a clean sheet, Saliba's probably slightly better for bonus. And he's lower owned than both the other two. So you could go for him as a differential. But I think if I was purely picking on points, it's White, then Gabriel, then Saliba. And then I've included Aït-Nouri for Crystal Palace at home. But he's not really that good for you in game week 38 because they've got Liverpool away. So essentially, if you're looking for a new defender, this is pretty much the order of them I would go for. I'm sure if I thought about this a bit more, I'd maybe swap some around because there's a few close decisions. But I guess you can just go through this list and pick a player that fits your budget. If there's none on here, I guess you could take a risk with Livramento at 4 million if you've got a spare Newcastle slot. If you don't and you need someone cheaper, you're really starting to kind of maybe scrape the barrel a little bit. Even like at Brighton, you've got someone like Veltman. He's 4.3. That could maybe work. But under that kind of price for a defender, like if I go to 4.4 or below, but you want someone at like 4.2, there's just hardly any good options. Like Gusto at 4.3 maybe. Gay obviously came back against Man United. They've got Wolves away, Villa at home. He's only 4.2 million. Will he start both games? There's a chance. Chris Richards, similar, 3.9 million. But the option, I think you've just got to try and find some money from somewhere. Anyway, that's the defensive options. Let's talk about the midfielders. So the list for midfielders is slightly smaller. At the top, I've gone for Son against Burnley at home and Man City at home. It's pretty close between him and Palmer. They're both pretty much guaranteed for minutes, both on penalties as well. Similar enough stats too. The reason I put Son ahead is just because he's at home for both fixtures rather than away. I keep thinking if I didn't captain Haaland this week, who would I go for? Isak is definitely an option, but I'm pretty sure I would go for Son over Palmer. Therefore, it kind of tells me I think deep down he's the slightly better option. So that's what I would do, even though Son's returns haven't been great recently. Then De Bruyne, just because he's more of a differential over Foden. There is nothing wrong with Foden whatsoever, apart from the fact he's super high owned. But if you're looking for someone at a better price than De Bruyne, he's definitely who I would go for. Then Gordon, because there's no fitness issues and stuff like that at the moment. And Brighton at home's a good fixture. Man United away is a pretty decent one too. Then I've got Richarlison ahead of Fernandes. But I did make this list before Ten Hag said Fernandes was back in training. So I suspect I would probably flip those two around just because you got the penalties. And I guess you can't guarantee the minutes from Fernandes because he has been a doubt and literally missed a game on Monday. But you know if he's fit to start, he probably is going to go and get 80 to 90 minutes in both matches. So I think Fernandes, then Richarlison, then Gross, who definitely gets better without Joao Pedro around because of penalties. Madueke is a great punt against Forest away and Brighton away. Lots of talk about him as a differential this week. So his ownership is going up. But there's not that many transfers in for him. If I look at how many he's had this week, it's 74,000. And in terms of all midfielders, that puts him 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th on the list. So there are still plenty of other midfielders that are being brought ahead of him. So if you've got a spare Chelsea slot, you could look at him. Garnacho, again, I couldn't, despite how bad Man United were in the last game, I've still got him on the list. Then Adingra, I really like him at a similar price to Garnacho. He looked very good against Villa. And then it's your Arsenal players, Saka, and then Havertz. So again, if you're looking for a midfielder, that's roughly the order I would put them in. But I think when I put lists together like this, sometimes people think, well, if you've got Son ahead of De Bruyne, that means he's miles better. It's not really the case. With Son, Palmer, De Bruyne, Foden, and Gordon in particular, take your pick, really. If you've got a preference over one over another, then that is what you should go for. At the end of the day, you need to be happy with the team that you pick. But for me, that is the rough order. All right, let's get into some of your questions. So if I have to sell an Arsenal defender this week, should it be White or Gabriel? Now, in terms of attacking threat, I actually think they're quite similar. I know Ben White has looked good, especially recently, and he's had the attacking returns more recently as well. But Gabriel is a genuine threat from set pieces. I think minutes-wise, they're quite similar. I don't see either of them not starting the last two games, especially if the league title is still on. Gabriel maybe slightly more chance to get to 90 minutes, but as long as Ben White comes off with the clean sheet intact, and after 60, you don't mind an early substitution. And Ben White's ownership is probably still a little bit lower than Gabriel. So if I was going to sell one of these two, it'd probably be Gabriel purely because of the ownership. But again, it's a very tight decision. If you've got a preference either way, it probably doesn't matter a huge amount. So outside of Dunk, which Brighton defender is the most likely to start? Now, for those of you watching on YouTube, I'd love some input from Brighton fans in the comments below because I'm not sure any of the other options outside of Dunk are likely to get you more than kind of one start. At least it's not guaranteed, right? If you look at the recent minutes they've had, like Barco started in 34 and 35, but only got 1 minute against Aston Villa. Igor has started the last two games, but didn't play against Man City in game week 34. Did start the game before that as well, and he can play left centre-back or left-back. You've also got Adam Webster, who started the last game, that plays centre-back too, and you know that Dunk's always going to play. So at right back, I already mentioned Veltman at 4.3 million. Like, he looks like a pretty good option. But in the press conference today, I think it was said that Tariq Lamptey is not too far from returning. Now, Tariq Lamptey is also never too far away from picking up an injury either. But if he was available to start one of the games, he could even start right back instead of Veltman. So if I had to pick one, it probably would be Veltman at 4.3. But there's just a hunch. There's no more than that. I don't think I can guarantee. I don't know if there's any defenders outside of Dunk that are likely to start the last three games. I guess for a lot of people, you only really want them for 37. There's not really an intention to play them in 38 anyway. But there's still no guarantee there. So I guess I'll say Veltman. But if you are a Brighton fan, leave a comment below and let me know if I got that completely wrong. Is there another defender that looks good? Or is it just a case of any of them could be rotated? So hopefully most questions that people had have been covered through the press conference information, the defender and midfield list, and obviously the last two questions I've answered as well. But there was a lot more stuff that came in, and as it's the last double game week of the season, I'm going to try and run through some of the remaining questions in a quick fire-ish fashion, as quickly as someone like me can answer this stuff. So should I attack the double game week with my 2 free transfers or save for game week 38? Look, game week 38 is important, of course, like any other game week. There could be rotation, early team news because all teams kick off at the same time. But don't ignore the double. If you can get extra points this week, more points than you're going to get by saving those transfers for 38, get them used this week instead. It's nice to have 2 free transfers in 38. It's not essential. Should I do Garnacho to Bruno or Richarlison for a hit or keep? He's very likely to start both games. I probably wouldn't take a -4. Any advantage that you can point out based on fixtures to use bench boost in 38 instead. At this point, you really should have already decided where you're going to bench boost based on how your team is set up. And unless your bench is going to look better in 38, just use it this week, right? Because otherwise you're going to have to use a bunch of transfers to fix your team. So I think it's pretty simple, right? Most people just use it in 37. Dubravka out for a hit. I kind of tackled this earlier. I think I probably would do that. I'm not completely convinced it's the right move, but I suspect I would do it if I was in that situation. Am I mad to pick Richarlison over De Bruyne? I wouldn't say that's a mad move. Richarlison's ownership is a lot lower. I like the fixtures that Spurs have got, specifically the Burnley game in game week. The first game of the double in 37. I think De Bruyne's got a great chance of starting twice. We know how strong City can be. I think De Bruyne is probably the better pick, but I don't think it's mad to go for Richarlison. Plus, he's cheaper. Plus, 38 fixture is good. That money might enable you to make another move. Is Madueke the best third Chelsea because nobody is nailed in defence? Arguably, yes. But also you have to factor in he's a midfielder. He's going to take up a midfield spot. And there's a lot of good midfielders from other teams, including Cole Palmer from Chelsea, of course. There aren't so many good defenders. So as always, it's a combination, right? If it's Cucurella and Son, or Madueke and Romero or Porro, I probably prefer the Son and Cucurella option. But I do think Madueke is genuinely a good differential this week. Should we be switching single game week defenders for double game week ones for hits? Broad answer, probably not. It depends, obviously, who you're selling and who you're buying. If it's one of the top defenders for 37, like, I don't know, like a Porro, Vardy, Walker, Davern, whoever it might be, and it's a single game week with a bad fixture who also is not going to be useful to you in game week 38, I'd maybe do it. Outside of that, probably not. I wouldn't sell Arsenal defenders, Everton defenders, €8 for a hit, and most double game week defenders probably just aren't worth taking 4 points for. I would consider which 3 defenders you might want in game week 38, because if you're buying Man City or Spurs ones, they do have a good fixture there, so it might also benefit you in 38 as well as 37, and that might be more reason to take the hit. Richarlison versus Gordon for 37 and 38. I think just based on minutes, it's got to be Gordon. But again, Richarlison's a nice differential. And will Neto start for Bournemouth? He hasn't started the last 3 games. I wouldn't count on it. He's worth getting rid, especially if your bench boost, even for a -4. All right, I'm going to end by talking about my own team. If you're not interested in my ramblings over transfer decisions I'm really not sure about, then this is a great time to switch off. Come and join me for the deadline stream, which should be starting around 9 AM UK time tomorrow. But the reason that I'm not sure about what to do is because I'm kind of in a good position where I don't have a huge amount of issues in my team. So I'm looking for luxury transfers where my team is already pretty well set up, and I'm not sure what position to leave myself in for game week 38. I appreciate that's tiny violin time. Lots of you are sat there with injuries, and that's hugely frustrating. But that isn't the case for me. So I've got Petrovic in goal. My back 3 is Dan Burn, Dalot, and Pedro Porro. I mean, some people might say that Dalot is an issue. There's no clean sheets there for Man United. It could even be negative points. So I appreciate that. But I cannot bring myself to sell him for a single game week player. I'm not going to move Dalot to like Branthwaite or Tarkowski or, triple Arsenal defence or anything like that. And I'm not sure there's a better double game weeker. And bear in mind, for my team, I'm tripled up on Chelsea, Newcastle, and Man City. I've got Brighton slots free, and I've got 1 Spurs slot free. But Dalot to Romero or Dalot to Dunk, it just doesn't seem great, right? I mean, if you were buying new, Dalot would be at the bottom of that list, and therefore you could say it's worth a transfer because I've got 2 frees. I don't know. There's something telling me just don't do that move. But it is an option anyway. But Dan Burn and Porro are fine. Midfield, I've got Palmer, Son, Gordon, Foden. They're going absolutely nowhere. Bruno Fernandes, who's currently yellow flagged at the time we're recording. And that might stick until the deadline because Ten Hag didn't say he's definitely available. He only said he's in training. But I think he'll probably be fine. Haaland captain, that's going nowhere, right? He will be my captain. Then I've got Isak alongside him. And my bench boost, which is active, is Edison, Jackson, Gabriel, Saliba. So I think my 3 choices are Saliba to Romero, just to fill that 3rd Spurs slot, get another double game weeker in. Do I think Romero is better than an Arsenal defender in game week 38? No, but I do think he's better this week. So if I did that move, I'd only have one single game weeker, which would be Gabriel, which is more how I like to play. I like to have as many doublers as possible. And I'd have 2 free transfers in 38. And at that point, the Salah option wouldn't be a goer anyway, because I'd be keeping Fernandes. And so I could bring in an Arsenal midfielder, maybe even 2 if I wanted to, because I've freed up an Arsenal slot. Or I could even just get Ben White in 38. If there's really nothing else to do, then I could just get him in instead. And I guess in some ways, I also reduce my risk if the title is over by game week 38. Like, could Saliba be benched? If that happens, possibly. For what it's worth, I don't think it's very likely. I also don't think it's very likely the title will be over by then. But these are all things to think about. These are all small margins at the end of the season. So Saliba to Romero is one move I've spoken about before. I could do Ederson and Saliba to Vicario and Vardio, which I've already mentioned in a previous video. My main issue with that is I'm still just covering the Man City and Spurs defence that I'd be covering with Ederson and Romero just for one extra transfer. And again, I definitely think that Vicario and Vardio is the better combination. I just don't think it's better than having 2 free transfers. So I've kind of I've not ruled anything out, but I just don't see me doing that either. Or I just go through with the move that I was thinking about when we thought Fernandes was a doubt, and that is Fernandes to Richarlison. My main worry with that one is Richarlison is not guaranteed minutes, right? He has been managed in the last game where there was matches in quick succession. He may only start once in game week 37. And Fernandes, if he's fit, could start twice. And he's on penalties as well. And his minutes will probably be better in both of those games too. Richarlison is probably better in game week 38 because it's Sheffield United away. But for this week, Fernandes is fine. The thing I really like about the Richarlison move is it frees up the money for Salah. But it's not a guarantee I would even do that next week anyway. I'm just sat here, I'm struggling, right? I'd love your suggestions on Twitter or YouTube, whatever, however you want to send them to me. What other moves can I make? I've got 2 free transfers and let me just look here. 1.3 in the bank. But even if I wanted to go Dan Burn to Trippier, I can't do it, and I probably wouldn't want to do it either. I think I'm just a little bit stuck because of the amount of teams I'm already tripled up on. And Fernandes to Gross or Fernandes to Saka I just don't like it. I'd rather go to Richarlison. So if the deadline was in 5 minutes and I had to make a decision right now, I think I'm doing Saliba to Romero. But there's part of me that really wants to do Fernandes to Richarlison because I talked myself into how good of a move that was going to be if Fernandes was out. I'm really glad Fernandes is back from a Man United point of view because we need him. But for FPL, it would have been much handier if he missed out and I could have just done that Richarlison move without any concerns. Like, I can't take a punt on Madueke again. I'm already tripled up on Chelsea. So, I don't know. How important is 2 free transfers for game week 38, I guess? I don't think it's that. Like, if I look at this team now, I think most of them will start in 38 as long as they're fit. Like, Burn Gordon, he's out, almost certainly will. Fernandes will if he's fit. Petrovic and Ederson are probably fine as long as the title's still on. Same for Haaland, Foden and the Arsenal boys. Like, maybe 2 free transfers just isn't needed. And the other thing is they all got good fixtures. City against West Ham, Arsenal against Everton, Newcastle, Brentford away is maybe a little bit trickier, but it's not a problem. Spurs, Sheffield United away, Chelsea, Bournemouth home. So none of these players are going to be, unless they don't start, they're not going to be a massive issue to have to get rid of. So maybe 1 free transfer is fine, and maybe I just get Vardy. It's just, something tells me not to use an extra transfer just to cover the same defences. And what if Romero scores and Vardy only starts once, you know? I don't know. I'm looking for inspiration. I could sit here for another hour. I just don't see a better move. I mean, there is other stuff I could do, like Isak to Wilson. I'm just not going to do that. Just too risky. I don't know. Saliba to Romero might be the move. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Give that video a like if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button. Rate 5 stars if you're listening on podcast. I'm sure I'm missing something with this team. Maybe it's just Dallo out. Maybe I just take the hit. I not literally take a hit, but just take a hit on my stance of not selling double game weekers. But Fernandes to Richarlison is selling a double game weeker as well. I could do Dallo to Romero and keep Saliba. I just can't see me doing that though. Keeping a single game week, it sounds horrible. But Arsenal are good for game week 38. But Romero's got Sheffield United away. I don't know. I'm giving up. Thanks for watching. 9 AM UK time tomorrow for the deadline stream. I'll catch you then. Good luck with your decisions. Hopefully they're a bit easier than mine. And again, I know I'm in a good position. I get it. But it's still, like, in some ways it's more frustrating because I can't figure out what to do. Anyway, rambling. Bye.